Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Rose. This is Jessica Bun Bun. We are here talking all about True Detective Night Country, episode 2. Boy, oh boy, what a crazy episode. Just to give you guys a heads up as to what's going down here. We have rewatched all of True Detective season 1 over
Mhm.
the past week because we had sort of the Rust Cohle bat signal kind of went up into the sky, and we were like, oh, we need to go back and take a look at this.
Yeah, episode 1 had sort of brought up Rust's dad in Alaska. This episode 2, really, it dived into season 1 quite heavily. So, yeah, we had decided to go back and rewatch season 1 because it's been a minute, it's been a long time since it aired, and thank goodness that we did, because this season is becoming more and more connected to season 1 than I originally anticipated. I mean, normally you can kind of jump into True Detective seasons and not have seen other seasons and enjoy it, much like Fargo, where maybe there might be a little Easter egg, but
Yeah.
there's nothing that stops you from really diving in. But this episode, I mean, we had Russ' dad mentioned. We saw the spiral popping back up. We heard the Tuttle family name back. I mean, this is really connected to what happened with the Yellow King and what happened in season 1.
This is the first of many questions we're going to ask you guys in the comments throughout this video. Is this season inspired by season 1, or is it a direct sequel to season 1? Like, I think that's important when it comes to sort of piecing together what message this show is trying to give us.
Yeah, and the biggest question I have coming out of this is, are we going to see Rust Cohle in this season? I mean, we know that he lived in Alaska for a while. He went back to Alaska for a while. We don't know where he ended up by the end of season 1. He was just, leaving the hospital with Marty, and it was kind of like, who knows where he's going to end up again. So, could we actually see him brought in? If these are all connected, we have Tuttle, part of this whole thing. We know that they kind of got away with it in season 1, and now their name is coming back up again. Is there a way that we could actually see him on this season? And if we do we need to see him? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, season 1 was so good that if we brought him back, does it ruin it a little bit or does it make it better?
Well, we'll talk all about this, but before we do go any further here, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more coverage of True Detective Night Country, because we have so much stuff coming over the course of this season. Also, every week we do live streams all about True Detective at our Patreon. You can join that by checking out the link in the description below.
Okay, let's talk about Travis Cole,
Yeah.
because he was mentioned fully by name
Yeah.
in this episode, and this is Rust's dad. And so some of the quick timeline of this from season 1, if you haven't seen season 1, or you're just like, hey man, I need a refresher, we're
Yeah.
here to give you the refresher. So it was back in the mid 90s when Rust and Marty had the case of the Yellow King, and they were, of course, dealing with the case. They thought that they had figured it all out with the Childress family. But by the end of it all, they realized that they hadn't gotten everybody. And then they ended up realizing that they got the Childress family, but they did not get the Tuttle family. They got away with it. There was a lot of people that were involved in these killings and what was going on. But the timeline is kind of like, by the time that they hit 2002 and Marty and Rust had that big falling out, Rust went back to Alaska, and he was back there for about 8 years, he said. And back in the mid 90s, when he was telling these two detectives, like, oh yeah, my dad had leukemia, and the detectives were like, there's no record of that anywhere. That has now been mentioned here in season 4, that Travis did have leukemia. So if there was no records of that, is that something that Travis felt that he had? Had he seen sort of a doctor off the books or anything like that? But timeline wise, if what Rust was saying was partially true, because we know he was lying to
Mhm.
those two detectives because he was actually off with the bikers doing other stuff. If what he was saying was true about his dad, though, that his dad had leukemia in the mid 90s, by 2002, when he went back to Alaska, his dad very well could be still alive. And if that is the case, does Travis know about the case? Now, I know that he said that him and his dad, they didn't get along that well, but that doesn't mean that they didn't talk and they didn't share things, and he may not have mentioned this case in passing. Travis clearly has a role to play in this, even though Travis has passed on, because he's giving information to Rose. So is it possible that that information about the Tuttle family and everything that happened is going to get all connected back either through Travis or, through the young detective who has now figured this out?
There's a lot of different layers I think we have to unpack with all of this, including the idea that, okay, Russ said that he didn't have a great relationship with his dad. He said that. Does that make
Mhm.
it reality? Like that's one thing we have to think about here, because it's also, relationships with people also evolve over time. There might have been a good relationship at one point, a bad relationship at another. Another interesting tidbit here is that Travis was apparently somewhat of a survivalist, and
Mhm.
that Travis had a little bit of animosity towards Russ for leaving Alaska in the first place, for going back to Texas because he couldn't handle the cold. And so there's this.
I completely understand. I'm from Canada.
Yeah.
I left to come to California. I don't like the cold either.
See, I'm okay with some cold. Not in this Alaska cold. I'm just saying that right now. But because of sort of the way in which Travis left, I think it lived, sorry, because of the way in which Travis lived, I don't know if there's necessarily all that much in the way of a record as to what he went through, who he talked through, anything. But you could also sort of make this argument that if Travis was this person who was kind of living off this land, he may have sort of developed these supernatural or ethereal qualities that kind of lend itself now to being the vision that is out there. I mean, this is not by any means like Travis is still alive. I'm not going crazy here and saying that this dude is like surviving the freezing cold or whatever, but I think Travis is representing something to the people that are seeing him, whether it be an element of guilt, whether it be a truth that they sort of inherently know themselves, that his memory is lingering on, and it doesn't necessarily have to linger on in a bad way. Like, okay, let's take a second at the end of season one, because there's something very interesting that Russ mentions in this when he's almost dying after the big battle in the finale, that he kind of descends into darkness. But then as he descends further and further in, he starts to see his late daughter. He
Mhm.
starts to see his father.
Mhm.
He has these sort of moments and this connection, and it's almost like they are the light within the darkness. This show has these themes of darkness and light. I know it's pretty simplistic when you look at it that way, but they're interwoven. You can't have one without the other. Travis may be the light in the midst of this literal darkness that is Ennis, Alaska, where there is no sunlight happening at all. In the midst of all of this darkness, can Danvers and Navarro see the light?
Yeah, and I mean, Navarro is really talking to Rose sort of about visions and seeing things, and that was something, that was happening to Rust as well. Now, Rust had said that a lot of that he thinks had to do with being undercover for a really long time, doing a crazy amount of drugs, and that's why that was happening to him. But he doesn't know for sure that that is what's happening, because it feels like where we are now in season 4 with this sort of like there's visions and people are seeing things and what is going on, that maybe there's just something really special about this place. And I know that True Detective in general is not really like supernatural and whatever, but there is little elements of that, and there was sort of a lot of back and forth play throughout the series, season 1, this season as well, of sort of like the science of it all and the religion of it all.
I think what really matters is what information does somebody have? If they think that this is delivered to them by a ghostly spirit, it really just matters that they have that information now. And if that information is true, maybe it didn't come from the place in which they said it did, but does it really matter? And that's a part of what makes this season complicated.
Yeah.
And now we get into Clark.
Yeah, let's get into Clark and this spiral tattoo, because this is also connected to season 1, where we saw this spiral all throughout the season. It was absolutely a symbol that, was being used by this group. It was burned into their backs. It was written on everything. And now here we are with Clark with the spiral tattoo. And we know that him as a scientist is working at this place that is funded by the Tuttle, family industries. It's just like Tuttle United has all these different sort of companies and things that they're putting their money into. They were very powerful in season 1. They're clearly still very powerful now. They got away with their involvement in everything in season 1. And here they are now. Is it a coincidence that Clark is now, oh, this spiral is showing up. Oh, he's working for Tuttle United. It's like, okay, this is not a coincidence.
This brings me back to that question I posed earlier on in this video. Is this meant to be like directly connected to season 1 in every single way? Or is it just we're bringing some themes and ideas from season 1 into the present? Because there's a couple of different schools of thought here now with Clark. I don't think it's a coincidence that, Tuttle United is founding this place, and I think they want us to clearly be thinking about this stuff. Now, we know that the Tuttles were in part they were behind these institutions, I guess you could say, of quote unquote learning that were going on way back when they were basically convincing people of many awful belief systems. It's certainly possible that Clark is a byproduct of those in some degree, and that those awoke something within him that's starting to kind of come to pass now in the present. And this is all sort of directly connected in the way that, Childress, a part of him, was activated by what the Tuttles were doing. It's possible we could say the same thing here with Clark. However, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. I don't want to just be like driving down the road 100 miles an hour. It's very well possible that Clark, he's at a very remote research station. He's this place is funded in part by the Tuttles. He may have just been very bored one day, did a lot of research, and started to go down this really dangerous rabbit hole of bad information and ideas. And he would not be the first person to be convinced of a belief system by the internet and completely lose his mind as a result.
Okay, let's talk about Pete's role in this, because he's the person who brought the Tuttle information to Danvers. So I'm wondering if it's going to be him that, if we see Rust come back, is it going to be his digging where he's able to make those connections? Because he really is sort of this, protege to Danvers. He is doing a lot of the legwork and digging into things. And, I really like their relationship and how they've been, she's really encouraging him, ask the right questions, dig into this a bit deeper to see, is he going to be the person that actually makes that connection now that he's like, oh yeah, we've got, Tuttle United. Once he starts digging deeper, will he be the person to make that connection? Or is there going to be something else that brings Rust into this? Because it's starting to feel, I know this is a very short season, so, it's like we're early on, but we're not. I mean, like the next episode's the halfway mark, guys. Like we're all almost there. Where it's like, if he's going to be brought in, or a phone call or something, like it feels like it's ramping up pretty fast.
All right. I think it's time. It's time to channel Matthew McConaughey here, guys. Okay, now here's the thing with Rust. I would be down to see him in a couple of scenes, maybe. I think Rust Cohle is an incredible character. McConaughey, I think it's the best role he's ever played. I would love to see Rust. However, I think you got to be really careful. I don't want to shortchange everybody in Night Country by just bringing in Rust Cohle, and then this whole season becomes about Rust Cohle instead of about, okay, what's going on here? If he can provide something that's an asset, and we know he's still out there, and maybe that opens the door for him to come back some point, in a further capacity down the road, that's great. But I don't need him to overtake everything else that's going on here.
Okay, tinfoil hat.
All
Are
right.
they then setting up for Russ to come back for the next season? Because 6 episodes is not enough time to take down the Tuttles. Like, it just isn't. If they weren't able to do it in the first season, it doesn't feel like this is enough time to take down something this big, which is, if they're really everything that's behind it. This could be a situation where it's like, yeah, the Tuttles got away with it, and Clark is somebody who is maybe influenced, but he's taking it upon himself to do something else, and maybe the Tuttles were like, we got almost caught, like, okay, so
Yeah.
like, let's back off from this horrible thing that we're doing, and we'll move into some other horrible thing that we're doing, so that nobody ever kind of comes back and connects this again. Who knows, right? But my feeling with Rust is, I don't think that they can bring him back in a way that doesn't have him completely involved in this. Like, from watching him in season 1, he's so down the hole with anything that he has his focus. There's just no way that they're going to call him up and be like, hey, these cases might be connected, can you give us a little information? He's gonna be like, okay, here, I'll send my files over, and then like walk out the room. Like, Rust is not that man. And so I'm not sure how they believably
Mhm.
bring him back in a capacity that he is not going to be like, I'm already in Alaska, let me just show up over here at the station, or he's not like, I'm on the next plane.
It's a challenging thing. It's something that they would really have to figure out, and that's why I'm okay if we don't see him for that very reason, where he just doesn't completely overwhelm everything.
Yeah, but that's why I'm thinking, like, is it possible he could just show up at the very end of it all, where it's like, okay, we, figured out what happened with Clark, we figured out what happened with Annie, but the Tuttles are still out there, let's make the call.
Well, the thing ultimately here is that the Tuttles are clearly like a big bad within this universe, and it's something that we should have in the back of our minds. But on the just in what's directly in front of us right now, like Danvers and Navarro, their immediate focus has to now be, okay, we had all these bodies that were frozen. We brought them
Mm-hmm.
over to the ice rink, which is just, really terrible memory for this ice rink, by the way, whenever these bodies, it's like, oh, there were a bunch of dead frozen bodies here once upon a time. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, when they started to name these bodies early on in the episode, I was like, did anyone say Clark? Nobody really said Clark at that point. I like put it in the back of my brain, forgot about it, and then at the end of it, they were like, oh, Clark's not here. He's still alive. Like, that is the big present day problem that they have to try to figure out here.
Yeah, Clark is still out there now. Is he alive? Maybe, possibly. Is he dead and he's somewhere else? Maybe, possibly. We just know that he is not in this group of people. And we know that tongue is Annie's. They have now confirmed that it is.
Here's a little bit as to what I think could be going on motivation wise for Clark. I mean, this
Mhm.
is tinfoil hat on top of tinfoil hat material here,
All right,
but
let's get
okay.
into the theories.
I feel like, there's obviously a lot of madness going on with Clark at this point. Like,
Mhm.
you don't do some of the things that he has supposedly done without that. Like, somebody removed Annie's tongue. Somebody brought that tongue to the research station. And while you could say, oh, it's theoretically possible somebody else at the station did it, Clark found out about it going down that
Mhm.
rabbit hole. It's just all the scribblings that he has, that trailer that we saw at the end of this episode, just the imagery there. This is not the imagery of somebody who is walking the straight and narrow. Like, this is somebody who has clearly been down a rabbit hole for a long time, to the point that they were willing to get a tattoo of the spiral. So there's a lot going on with this guy, and what they're apparently trying to research at this Salal research station is basically a way to use the past in order to shape the future of the
Mhm.
world, to be able to find solutions deep within this permafrost that are going to help cure diseases, find all of these other sort of problems and find a way to solve them. I just feel like there's something about what they have done that has caused him to realize, oh, this is not the way in which it is intended. And if he has gone down sort of the Tuttle teaching rabbit hole here, we saw in season 1, Childress really thought that he was existing on this like other plane of
Mhm.
the universe, that he was sort of guiding the future. And, Clark could easily have these same sort of delusions of grandeur at a certain point, and he's just like, okay, nature or whatever belief system I have it needs to punish these other scientists for what they're doing. And for them to all be killed in the way that they were and not seemingly fight back, and like they would have to be taken out by somebody they presumably would have trusted. And they, Clark's been with them, they've been isolated for a very long time. It makes a little bit of sense to me.
Yeah, especially with the folding of the clothes, like everything felt very purposeful.
It did, and that's why it feels like, Clark has to be the one that has done this. And also, you mentioned earlier, this is a 6-episode season. I don't know how much we can look at this as okay, who are all the other suspects that are out there who could have done this, just because there's not a lot of time.
Yeah, it feels like a lot less of who did this, and it feels a lot more like why are they doing this?
Yeah, and there's clearly in general a lot of tensions that are sort of boiling over within the town. And where I think all that is representing on this show is the difficulty that Navarro and Danvers are going to have to get answers, because you have like certain groups of people there who are all about supporting the local community and
Mhm.
all about making sure that their voice is heard. But then you also have this mining community that's going on here. There's a lot of distrust on both sides for people within the police force. And beyond all of that, Danvers' own, boss slash occasional lover slash former doctor Christopher Eccleston, like he doesn't even want her like investigating this case anymore, but she is really gung ho and like, no, you're not sending this to Alaska, to Anchorage. This is mine. She's clearly overcompensating for a lot of what has happened in her past, and I think she feels a responsibility to have to solve this now.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of other things going on right now on the show, and it's too early to say whether or not they matter in the grand scheme of things,
Mhm.
but because this is a short season, we can't really ignore them. One of them is Hank and, his quote unquote bride to be, or bride, whatever we want to call this. Like, this is the second episode that they focused on this. And at first I was like, okay, this is just like some sort of silly runner, but they brought it up again in this episode to the point where he's like taking pictures, doing all these other things. Like, I think they said that this person's in like Vladivostok, which is like it's a city. It's not super close to where they are. I know, there's all these jokes about how close Russia is from Alaska and all that other sort of stuff, but it's not like directly there, that city. So it's a little bit of a journey if that's where this person really is. There's just something odd to me about this guy who's taking all these pictures. Do we need to call up your friend Neve Schulman at some point to
I know.
investigate this situation?
Catfish.
I get, there's just something odd about this.
Listen, this almost feels a bit like they want to have backstories, like what happened in season one. I mean, like part of what makes season one as rich as it did was these sort of backstories where you had, Rust is, he's such a strange character, but he really does have integrity and live by sort of this moral code. And then you got Marty on the other side where he's this family man, but he's, with these other very young women and doing these other things, but he thinks he's the upstanding guy, sort of thing, where it feels like they want to have some sort of more personal stories going on with this cast so that we can kind of get to know them in that way. But I think the thing that's just kind of missing from it is that in season one, those stories directly connected to who they were also as detectives, where here it's kind of like, are these things connecting to them as, detectives and their police work? So we have this story of this bride and Hank, but it's like, okay, but is this actually connecting to him and his work? Because he feels like he's very much just a secondary character in this. So if you're going to have him, then do we need the backstory, or could this be more into Danvers or Navarro and their backstories that are going to hopefully connect to their work?
The only suspicion that I have is that this bride is catfishing him for the sole purpose of like eventually getting information on the case and then having a leg up in the investigation. But it is a big stretch. Like, we are stretching that taffy really, really thin. The one that's probably a little bit more interesting is what's going on with Leah at this point and sort of the bonds that she is building. And it feels
Mhm.
like she is eventually going to discover something or walk into something where either she gets a little bit in danger or she finds out a clue as to something that is going on here that could at the very least tie into what happened to Annie, because that's still a big part of this. Like, if Clark killed Annie, like, why did he do that? It doesn't gel with what I've already said about him maybe thinking that the other researchers were just like on the wrong path. Like, did he think Annie was in the way of all of it? That just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really hard to know, especially with this tattoo where, it was like, oh, he brought this picture of, her with the tattoo or with the drawing, the spiral. And it was like, oh, this was the model sort of thing. And it's like this picture of him, like in a warm sort of embrace kind of thing. And even though we can't really see her, it's like, is she there of her own free will? Is she not? It's like, it's impossible to really tell.
It's really it's hard to figure out. Like, I think they clearly had some sort of relationship. I think he must have built a certain amount of trust in her. But this story, I mean, it's a lot about darkness versus light. It's a lot about, ignoring underrepresented communities and, the issues that are going on there. It's also just about why is no one paying attention to this research station, or the fact that like these people are just all cloistering themselves, not really going anywhere. But of course, we're meant to think about so many different things. We've posed a lot of questions in this video, and now we want answers from you guys. Let us know your theories. Is Rust coming back? How is it all tied together? Get out your cork boards.
Yeah.
Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button. As we set up earlier, we have live streams on Patreon every week talking about True Detective. Check that link out in the description. If you want more True Detective, we've got your premiere review right here. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you here next time.